Okay, welcome everyone who's just joining. Irene, are you ready to get started?
Thank you, Cecilia. Yes. Muy buenos días a todos y todas.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. Now I would like to share the presentation.
Bien. Buenos días.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this Climate and Health Responder course for Latin America. If you haven't attended one of our sessions before, I'd like to tell you that this course is organized by the Global Consortium on Climate and Health Education, hosted by the Columbia University from the United States, also the IAI and the Pan American Health Organization, who are all in attendance today. You can listen to the course in Spanish if you wish to do so. I think both of them will be speaking in Spanish. So if you want to listen to the English version, please click on the bottom at the bottom of the screen. Today we'll be talking about food and water safety and security. Dr. Walter Basin from the International Research Institute, the Earth Institute at Columbia University, and Dr. Vivian Camacho, Ministry of Health, Bolivia. As you can see, we have several sessions. We have 2 sessions a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays. If you have colleagues that still want to enroll, they can do that. So please share the course information with them. Today we have 70 minutes of content and then 20 minutes for questions and answers. Please do not use the chat for writing the questions. Please use the Q&A section so that we can see them. The sessions will be recorded and posted after the course. The slides will also be shared. You don't need to request the slides. They will be posted online as well. We're also uploading the suggested readings. This is sent on the link that you received to join the meeting today. This is the website, which is also included in the email you were sent. So first of all, Dr. Walter Basin, he's a senior research scientist, director of the regional and sectoral research program at the International Research Institute for Climate and Society at the Columbia Climate School. He served as acting director of the Agriculture and Food Security Center at the Earth Institute, both at the Columbia University. He's a co-chair of the Climate School's Network on Healthy and Sustainable Food Systems. He has established regional research and education programs that aim to improve climate risk assessment and risk management in agriculture, health, water resources, and natural ecosystems. In 2020, he became the vice president of the board of directors of INEA, the Uruguayan National Agricultural Research Institute. Thank you very much for being here with us today and for sharing your valuable knowledge with us. Please go ahead. Thank you, Irene. Good morning, everyone. I would like to share my screen now. Is that okay? Yes, that's great. Thank you. Good morning. Well, the aim of this presentation is to stimulate the debate. In similar activities, many times, I find that climate change is a topic that is present everywhere. But the thing is that how do we actually include it in our daily activities? In the work we do in several areas, in planning, decision making, informing public policy, etc. So this is the aim of this talk, to stimulate the debate. First of all, when you want to include climate change as a topic, in health in this case, but in general, in any socioeconomic sector, First of all, we need to make sure we understand what we talk about when we talk about climate change, causes, impacts, and what can be expected for the future. That's number one. The second challenge is how to actually transfer that knowledge. If we want science to inform our daily work and our public policy agendas, we need to know who transfer the knowledge, how they do it, which problems we encounter in the process. First of all, what is climate change? Climate change has to do with the greenhouse effect. And this is a cartoon showing this effect in a greenhouse. We have solar radiation entering the greenhouse. Part of that radiation is reflected by the glass, and part of it enters the greenhouse. That part actually heats the soil and then is reflected again inside the greenhouse. When it tries to escape the greenhouse, it crashes into the ceiling, so part of the heating is trapped in the greenhouse. Part of it is released, but the other part isn't. This is a greenhouse effect. And this is why within a greenhouse, the temperature is higher than outside the greenhouse. What happens with the greenhouse effect on a planetary level? We have solar radiation, which enters the planet, heats the surface of the Earth. Part of that heat is re-emitted into the atmosphere, and when it escapes the atmosphere, it meets the greenhouse ceiling, let's say. It's a number of gases that absorb that heat and re-emit it onto the Earth. This is the natural greenhouse effect. This is a greenhouse effect that allows that enables life on Earth. If we didn't have this, then the temperature now would be 10 or 20 degrees lower. The main greenhouse gases are carbon dioxide and water steam. In the last 250 years, human activity has been emitting a large number of these greenhouse gases, and that creates global warming and ends up causing climate change. So the first thing we need to remember is that the climate change issue and this augmented greenhouse effect is the greenhouse gases emission, and that's what we need to combat. These greenhouse gas emissions actually create an environment whereby there is a sort of ceiling and more heat is trapped that causes climate changes as well. So what's the issue? Again, the issue or the problem is greenhouse gas emission. If we want to combat climate change, we need to know which are the highest GHG emitters. Have a look at these very complex diagrams with the sources, but briefly, over 70% of these sources are related to energy. In industrial processing, 6%, agricultural activities, 12%, land use change, 6%. But once again, 73% of GHG emissions that are causing climate change around the world is caused by energy production. What we need to bear in mind is mitigation. We need to reduce the net GHG emissions. How do we do that? We can reduce the emissions, or we can remove part of the carbon from the atmosphere with some mechanisms. How do we reduce emissions? Once again, we need to decarbonize our activities. We need to reduce and minimize as much as possible the use of fossil fuels, and we need to create renewable sources energy, such as wind energy, solar energy, water. We need to decarbonize energy. Second, we need to stop deforestation. When we destroy a tropical forest, there is a large amount of carbon that was trapped in the roots, in the trees, and this carbon is rapidly emitted into the atmosphere. So we need to decarbonize energy production, and deforestation, and improve waste management. How do we remove carbon from the atmosphere? This can be done with by improving agricultural management techniques, for instance, improving production systems, etc. We could increase the forested area as well. And there are huge engineering structures. These are like huge filters that sequester carbon from the atmosphere. So once again, if we want to combat climate change, the main thing to do is to reduce GHG emission. But because of past emissions in the last 200 or 300 years, if we managed to halt all the world's greenhouse gas emissions, we would still suffer consequences for 40 or 50 years. Actually, the lifetime of CO2 is something in the atmosphere is something like 1,000 years. So we are still feeling the impacts of carbon dioxide that was emitted at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So you can imagine how important it is to, halt emissions, because they have an accumulative effect. This will continue. In the best scenario, climate will continue changing. So we need to adapt. We need to admit that part of the climate has changed, it will continue to change, and that is part of our reality. So first of all, in order to adapt to a future scenario, I need to ask myself what I know about the climate conditions for the future. What will happen with temperature and rainfall for the south of South America? What's the state of the art? What is the best scientific knowledge available? This is a map of South America. Have a look at this large section of southern South America. It includes a large part of Brazil, Bolivia, Paraguay, Argentina, Uruguay. Have a look at that section. And if we apply the best available tools to forecast future climate, and these are climate models, what do they say? They say the following. Here we have the temperature in that large section for the last 100 years. And models tell us what we can expect from the temperature, from a very optimistic scenarios, and they state what we can expect in very pessimistic scenarios in red. So optimistic or in blue, it's that we're going to be using so much renewable energy, will improve industrial processes, we will have better forestry practices, etc. Pessimistic in red, we will continue doing what we're doing now, a lot of fossil fuels, poor waste management, etc. Have a look at the huge forecast range. If we are very optimistic, we can say that the temperature at the turn of the century will be something like 0.5 degree or 1 degree higher than today. If we're pessimistic, it would be 6 or 7 degrees. It's a huge range, and it's very difficult to use in normal everyday decision making. And that goes for temperature, and it's even worse with rainfall. With rainfall, we can't even see trends. With temperature, we see that there will be an increase. But for rainfall, we do not even have trends. There is variety, there are higher red peaks, etc. And these are scenarios for a huge section, as I was showing you here. The decisions that we need to make every day when we work with health, agriculture, etc., they are also they're always local decisions. We don't know what's going to happen with the rain or the temperature globally. We focus on a province, on a region. If we were to do this locally, uncertainty is much higher. So what's the conclusion? The best tools that we have, scientific tools we have available nowadays to forecast future climate are very difficult to use because they are maybe the time frame is very large and there is a lot of uncertainty. Let's apply this to real life. What happened with rainfall in the last 80 years regarding climate change? What has been happening in the last 100 years? For instance, with summer rains. What we show here is how summer rain has changed in Uruguay, December, January, and February between 1930 and now in 5 areas in the country. And clearly, we can see that rain has increased substantially in 80 years. We've had increases of up to 60 millimeters a month when we used to have 200 millimeters in a quarter. Now we have 400 millimeters. That's a trend. But if we, for instance, let's choose this area in red, and we want to know what happened each year in that place. Have a look at what happened. We still have a trend, but have a look at the huge dispersion of data regarding rain. So we could ask ourselves, summer becomes more wet, it tends to rain more. So we could ask ourselves, how many times in the first 40 years did it rain 3 times more than expected? Sorry, or twice as much. In the first 40 years, we had rain just for 1 year, and that was twice as much. In the last 40 years, it was 9 times, in 9 years, we had twice as much rain. So we might say, okay, it's not that bad. We will have fewer droughts. So the next question is, in the first 40 years and in the last 40 years, how many times did it rain 3 times less than expected? Have a look at this. In the first 40 years, in 3 years, we had 3 times less rain. But the same thing happened in the last 40 years. So what do I mean by that? There might be a trend, an increasing trend, but what's the main takeaway? What increases is variation. There are more years with a lot of rain and many years or the same number of years with insufficient rain. And this is what we need to adapt to more extreme events, to more droughts, to more floodings, heat waves. So which is the main climate change threat? And everyone agrees in this regard. Higher frequency and higher damage caused by extreme events. The question is, what can we do to reduce the damage caused by these greater variation? How can we improve adaptability? And how can we improve our capacity to adapt? Sorry, our capacity to recover after this damage. How can we become more resilient? How can we do that? The first thing to do is to focus on improving risk management. This is climate-related risk. So we need an approach that is different from the one we've been implementing, which really focuses on what we can expect for 2070, 2080. And that's like the best solution we have, not to do anything. If I talk to a health minister or someone's working on disasters and I tell them, okay, by 2070, we can expect rain to behave like this, temperature to behave like this, but that's 2070. This person needs to do something about what's happening this afternoon or next month. And I'm talking about 2070. And I tell them, okay, that's far away in time, and we're really uncertain about it. And that's the best recipe for paralysis, just not doing anything. We need a different approach. We need to include climate change in our work. And to do that, we need to remember that first of all, climate change is not a future problem. Climate change is a current problem, and it's been going on for quite a few years. The climate change scenarios I have shown you towards 2080 and 2100 have been great for raising awareness, so that people know that we need to do something, otherwise we will have very serious problems. But they're very difficult to implement. They're very distant in time and they're highly uncertain. What we do know and what science knows, and they all agree that we can expect an increase in the frequency of extreme events, frequency and intensity. So the damage caused by droughts, floodings, heat waves. Some of the most harmful events of climate change are the frequency of these extreme events. These extreme events are the same ones that we see today. When there is a government and requests for help to adapt to climate change, to the future climate, the first question we ask is, do you think that you are efficiently adapted to today's climate? If there is a drought in your country, do you have a system that works perfectly well? When there is a flooding, you have an early warning system. Does it work properly? And in 99% of the cases, they say no. So we should start by addressing that. Let's think about what we can do now, today, in order to have societies that are better adapted to today's climate and that can respond to droughts, floodings, heat waves, etc. And we should build that resilience, that adaptation capacity. We must start today. And that's the main message regarding how we can implement climate change and what we can do today. So how can we improve climate risk management, and how can we improve our capacity to adapt and to recover when facing unfavorable climate events? We can organize in multiple ways. I'd like to tell you how we organize our work at the Climate and Society Institution of Colombia. We address the work through 4 pillars. We try to identify, number one, we try to identify the main vulnerabilities. For instance, I'm working in public health. Which areas or cases are the most vulnerable? And we do this with the users themselves. There is participation. Second, it's very difficult to take decisions with high uncertainty levels. So first of all, we try to understand which are the climate-related uncertainties, and we try to reduce those uncertainties as much as possible. What do we mean by climate-related uncertainties? And that means what we learned from the past, when we had negative extreme events that affected the country, which decisions really worked. So we need to learn from the past. We monitor what is happening now. In some areas, there might be a budding drought, which areas have a forecast that announces a major storm that may cause flooding. So we need to monitor the present as well. And also the future. What can I say about what will happen with the climate in the future, but not in the next 40 years? We need to say what we think will happen in the next 2 weeks, 3 months, so that we can actually inform decision-making and plans. So first of all, 1, identify vulnerabilities. 2, try to work with uncertainties. 3, identify which interventions we can promote in order to reduce vulnerability. A main one, health education, what we're doing today. You know, two communities coming together, climate and public health. We need to understand each other better. We need to know what type of information can help us in our work. And then other things that you know much better than I, vaccination campaigns, campaigns to improve food safety, access to quality drinking water, waste management, etc. What can we do now in order to reduce vulnerability? And then you can do all of this efficiently. You can identify the vulnerable sectors. You can identify the, the uncertainties. You identify the interventions, but we will be affected by a drought or a flooding. So we also need a number of strong institutional activities, also public policies that reduce risks or transfer them.
We need to be aware that there are many associated risks that we will not be able to manage. So what we cannot control will be transferred through insurance, through early warnings that have had an adequate allocation of financial resources, so it doesn't just become a good thing in theory. So these 4 pillars are what support our activities, and these have been very helpful to me. And then maybe you can apply these 4 pillars in your day-to-day activities as well. And I think you could find it a useful structure to work in climate and health related issues. So how do we identify vulnerabilities? This is quite different depending on which situation we are working in, but what would we say are like typical elements? For example, having population in flood prone areas, favelas in Brazil, the slums in Rio. Every time it rains frequently, these places overflow. Vulnerable populations in climate areas where there is a very high probability of cold spells.
De daños por vientos y lluvias, poblaciones susceptibles a enfermedades infecciosas. Ahora, la información climática aislada no sirve para nada. Lo tenemos que integrar a otra, para entender qué es lo que está pasando, cuál es el impacto del clima o no del clima. Por ejemplo, lo que ha pasado en
So
Brasil.
what happened in Brazil when soybean production increases in Mato Grosso, for example, an area where they were affected by the dengue mosquito, and it is the same route as the soybean route, those trucks coming from the port and the point of entry. So is that a climate issue? Well, no, not really. It is about the movement of people coming from a risk area to another area, or migrants in Peru. For example, migrants that come from the forest area in Peru, and they work closer to the mountain ranges, and they are carrying with them different diseases. So we always have to consider that it's not just about the climate dimension alone, but rather how it interacts with other variables. For example, let's look at this. That's why it is important to integrate concepts. What that graph shows in this pillar right here, annual food requirements. So if you look at that point 100%, it means that these Eastern African populations, when they reach 100%, it means that they are self-sufficient in terms of food production. So the highlands in Ethiopia just barely make it to the 100%. Highlands in Tanzania, they overproduce on average. and the Limpopo River, where they really overproduce. They go well over that 100%. So if I were to ask you, which of these three populations do you consider are more vulnerable to climate variability? Well, we would be tempted to say that they are more capable of becoming self-sufficient in terms of food production. I would say that they are less vulnerable. But look at this, it's not necessarily so. If you look at the origin of these food in Limpopo River, for example, most of the food come from a single crop, maize. So if I have one bad year in that region, for example, rain is not enough to sustain good crops that year, well, food production will significantly drop. Now, in the highlands of Ethiopia, a good portion of food production comes from purchase, people who work outside the production site and then they receive an income and then they will purchase their food. So even though they barely make it to the 100%, it is more stable than depending on a single crop. This is a very simple example to see how we need aggregate information and how we should measure vulnerability. Now, with regards to vulnerability, well, what I just said, how about uncertainty? How do we learn from the past? How do we monitor current times? So what can we say about the next couple of days? Well, we usually look at weather forecasts. This is very important for very immediate decision making. Now, we need to provide some context to these forecasts. Look at the map, Mexico, South America, Central America. This is the expected rainfall for the next couple of days, And in red or reddish colors, well, this area is expected to receive about 200 millimeters in 6 days. So what does that mean? Is that a lot? How well over or not the average will they receive? So we have the same type of information but expressed differently. So what percentage of the average do we expect? So in that particular region in Peru, they are expecting to be hit with double the average rainfall. So we need to provide context to our forecast. 200 millimeter alone don't really say anything, but the other, it does. It says it's double the average. So another question that we should ask is how unusual is that rainfall volume? Maybe it's quite common. And look at the result. In this particular region in Central America, this happens only once every 10 years. So we don't need to we cannot look at the forecast alone, but rather we should provide some context. We need tools that will allow us to see not only just how much rainfall should I expect, but what does that mean and what is the relative importance of those figures? Let me remind you that you only have 10 minutes left for your presentation. And looking into the next couple of months, the question that we should ask ourselves in the planning stage is how much will it rain in the next 3 months? If we do not know anything, if we do not have any information, we could say that, well, in any place in South America for the next couple of months, we could expect over the average, less than the average, or more or less the average. If I have no idea what will happen in the future, well, the odds for these three are the same. 33% of going over the average, 33% of getting somewhere around the average, and 33% of getting below the average. So the areas in white is those areas for which I know nothing, and all of them have the same odds of happening. But, for example, southeast of South America, that color says that instead of having a 33% chance of getting below the average, there are twice as many possibilities of having less the average. And the areas in green says that it's twice as likely to rain over the average. So what are these forecasts saying? They're showing the probability of having more, less, or average rainfall in the next few months. That is very important to see how we can incorporate this in decision making and in our plans. And you might tell me, well, this is not a lot of information, but let me show you something. And you can do this for any countryside location in the world. You should take average rainfall. This is southeast of Uruguay. On average, monthly millimeters, January, February, March, April. So the average of the past 100 years. So in that town, it rains somewhat a stable average every month in the past 100 years. So, well, what happens if I choose a period of random 15 years and I look at the monthly rainfall? What happens? Well, this happens. The big red dots show average rainfall in the past 100 years. And each of that different color lines show different 15-year periods. So which year is similar to the average year? Well, don't worry, it doesn't exist.
Move on to water and food security if possible.
Ya. Voy a terminar con esto. Entonces, ningún año se comporta como el
Yeah,
año.
let me just finish this very quickly. There is no year that behaves as the average year, and the likelihood of that being so is zero. Now, planning, decision, or institutions usually plan and decide thinking on an average year. We usually say that this is what happens with regard to temperature or rainfall every year. So that's what we usually do. And this is very closely connected to food security and disaster risk reduction and response planning. So any type of information that can provide data statistics for make better informed decisions is essential. So these probabilities as to, well, usually we plan based on information that has a zero probability. So what can we do to be better prepared to know whether we are going to suffer a food security problem? How does that come to be? Low rainfall, bad crops, disasters during harvesting period. So any information that allows us to be better prepared to what we expect will really help informed decision making and planning. I know we have very little time, and I will have to skip this area, and really you know what to do here and what we need to do to reduce vulnerability in terms of education, vaccination, and I won't even go there because that's what you do every day. I just included it to show you how we work and how we have adopted these aspects. And finally, this is so important to all of us, how we use early warning systems, next day's forecast, next month's forecast to be ready for drinking water issues, food security issues, and so on. Now, finally, I think it is very important in a practical manner Now, how do we convey this knowledge and transmit all this climate knowledge so we can incorporate it when issuing warnings with regards to food security threats, drinking water threats? So how do we really communicate what's going on today? A big challenge, I think that a big challenge is that we agree if we want to improve preparation for food security issues, drinking water issues, we should use science. Now, science today, is it really informing public health decisions, food security decisions, how we manage water resources? I don't think so. I think there is a big gap between the generation of science and how these inform decision making and public policies. And why is that? Because of the way in which we work. A decision maker working on food security issues, water resources, they use a holistic and many times intuitive approach. They look at climate, they look at social aspects of housing vulnerability, and so on. It's a very holistic and integrated approach. Now, how does science work? It is the complete opposite. Science specializes more and more in smaller aspects. So we know a lot about very specialized topics, but no one really connects the knowledge dots or islands. So decision makers are sailing in a sea of a lot of knowledge in isolated islands. We need people that are able to integrate the islands. So what you are doing in this course is crucial. You are people working in healthcare areas and want to integrate climate knowledge into your work. And also ingenuity. Sometimes we are very naive in how to integrate science uh, um, in decision making. So this is usually what a researcher does when, for example, we want to inform food security issues and we know our end users are going to be farmers and the Ministry of Agriculture. We know that there are some key intermediary agents like outreach services and meteorological institutes. And this is how we usually view the work. We generate information, we help develop and build capacities in the Meteorological Institute. We are going to work with the outreach services for better communication with farmers so they can work on food security issues. We're going to help the ministry develop public policy. But this is not what happens in reality. If you map what happens in practice and how information travels, this is what it would look like. It is much more complex than we would initially think. So this is essential for us when we are producing information, whether if we want to really inform public policy, if we really want to inform decisions, we must understand this flow, this network, and where are the weakest links or non-existent links, which ones are key. That means we need to work with interdisciplinary information. We cannot work in silos. And that means our universities need to train people who are able to integrate knowledge. Specialists are key, but people who are as able to integrate and translate this knowledge are key as well. So to wrap up, in climate change, what is essential is that we reduce GHG emissions. And remember that 70% comes from power. We do not really know what climate will be like in the future, or we don't know what we need to know to make concrete decisions to inform public policies. What we know is that events are going to be more harmful and more extreme. So we need to improve adaptation. And how do we do that? We should ask ourselves what we can do today to be better prepared in the future. What can we do today to improve adaptation? How do we structure it? Well, I showed you how we do it in our institution, and I hope you find it useful. There are many other ways of doing it. What is important to say is to ask ourselves, what can we do today? We shouldn't just look at 2080, but what can we do today? What can we do this year to inform decisions, to really have specific impact on real problems like food security, disasters, water resources issues? To inform those decisions, we need to integrate knowledge. And to integrate knowledge, we need to do things like the things we're doing right here today. These sessions, these training sessions like this, that you can connect with people in science and that you can translate it into your day-to-day work. Universities need to train people who are able to integrate and do so. Our universities nowadays train very specialized professionals, which is fine, but we also need people who are able to integrate knowledge and they can speak in the same language as decision makers, as someone working in public policy.
Al usuario final requiere
We
entender.
also need to reach end users, and they need to understand how these networks work. It's not enough to just have good research. It needs to be multidisciplinary, integrated, it needs to be participatory. We need to include the demands of those we want to help. Sorry, I think I took a few additional minutes, but this is what I wanted to share with you. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you so much. Thank you. It was excellent. Thank you for your questions in the chat. I'm sorry, in the Q&A section, we will be asking the questions at the end of both presentations. Now we have Dr. Vivian Camacho. Can you please turn on your camera? And I will be sharing your screen. Thank you.
Adelante, gracias.
Thank you. Go ahead. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. I am Dr. Vivi Camacho. I'm a Director General of the Health section of the Ministry of Health. It's great to be here today. This is the first edition of a major course on responding to climate change from a health perspective. This is great for Latin America and also the world. Next, please. I would like to introduce the case of Bolivia. Our aim today is to describe the indigenous perspectives on the connection between food, water, and health of ecosystems and its implications for human health. Next, please. Next. I have prepared this presentation for you. I am now in Brasilia. Life has brought me here. We're working with the health of the indigenous people of the Amazon. We're working with the Amazon People's Treaty. And we are addressing the issue of ancestral traditional medicine. Our indigenous peoples have answers that are important that we need to learn from. Thank you. Next, please. First of all, we need to highlight that health is a human right. It's not a good, and this is essential. We have a global pandemic situation. Everyone tells us that we need to wash our hands several times a day. And some communities do not even have water, and their living conditions are not are impossible. So we need to remember that health is a human right and not a good. And the same applies to healthy food and clean water. They're a human right. As Dr. Walter was saying, this is something that's happening now. We have climate migrants, and these are the indigenous populations historically affected, and they are the ones really suffering droughts, sudden climate changes. And that's where we need to address the issue of social justice. So healthy food, clean water are human rights, and states should guarantee these rights. We should also talk about the importance of health, which entails social justice for our peoples. As indigenous peoples, these peoples have resisted for centuries, protecting their cultural identity. So we need to talk about social justice, climate justice, epistemic justice, among others. And we need to remember that health is not just one culture that has been imposed. One health model has been imposed in our territories based on genocides and the colony. We need to go beyond the perspective of the Western hegemonic dominant macro culture in order to um, uh, protect our ancestral knowledge. There's a Zoom poll. Can we go ahead with that? Yes, please go ahead. There we have the Zoom poll question. Have you worked or do you work with intercultural issues in connection with other cultures and how they see the world? Yes, no.
Qué bueno saber el porcentaje, justamente para que vayamos.
It's so interesting to know the percentages so that we know how we can continue improving this intercultural conversation. Next, please. So our ancestral perspective. In Bolivia, we recognize the plurinational state has acknowledged our ancestral knowledge. Our ancestral medicine has to do with the ceremonies that promote balance, harmony. Our ancestral medicine is cultural identity and resistance. It actually helps us be healthy in many areas, spirit, body, etc. We need this health. We need to remember that ancestral medicine also looks after animals, plants, territories, and holy areas. We are living peoples, and we look after life and knowledge. Counter-hegemonic interculturality. It has to do with overcoming capitalist relations. Also, the capitalist market-based system has actually appeared more prominently during the pandemic. This is why we need to remember that ancestral knowledges, reciprocity, solidarity, and mutual care are values within the societies that have helped us. We need to transform that market-based idea in order to recover our ancestral values, and we need to have epistemic justice. We need to recognize that we are living in our communities because we have been helped to, be born, midwives, spiritual guides, etc. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. We would have been eliminated by different diseases, but thanks to the ancestral knowledge of our grandparents, we're alive here today, and we have this effective knowledge in the territory. Epistemic racism negates this knowledge. The structural historical racism that we need to suffer as indigenous peoples denies the existence of this knowledge. But during the hardest time of the pandemic, our peoples actually provide a response from our culture, our ancestral knowledges in order to protect them. Otherwise, we would have all died because of an unknown virus. But it hasn't been the case because we have applied our ancestral knowledge of plants, rituals, and also we need to remember that food is our medicine. Our Mother Earth produces our food and our medicine. This is why we need to encourage diversity. We need to remember the solidarity and affection of the peoples that resist. Some free meeting points. Wise people should respect each other. We need to remember that that we have different indigenous cosmovisions, etc. Diversity makes us stronger. We need to do our bit to support life. We shouldn't try to persuade other people. We need to be imaginative in order to show solidarity amongst ourselves, and we should learn how to complement our knowledges without arrogance or without affecting other people. This is why we need both types of medicine to have a conversation on our territories, both academic conventional medicine and traditional ancestral medicine. Next, please. In Bolivia, before the racist and fascist coup, we had an ancestral traditional medicine ministry. Hopefully this will be recovered. This law 459 in our country recognizes the wise people that have this knowledge. In many communities, when we were children, we didn't have doctors around. We had no one within the territory, but we've always had wise people looking after us with plant ceremonies, with the diseases as detected by each culture. There is a national community family policy. It's also intercultural. It is based on the principles of social participation, intercultural values, gender, and social inclusion, so that this dialogue is possible, so that both cultures can work together, because our hegemonic culture has failed indigenous peoples over the world. But we are here because our knowledge remains alive. We need to promote complementarity and reciprocity. We need to promote the interaction of knowledges, and we need to include people, especially indigenous peoples that have been historically marginated. We consider the agricultural calendar, we look after Mother Earth, and we focus on producing healthy food. This has to do with respecting Mother Earth. We need to decolonize health. We need to remember that we come from this knowledge. We come from a time when in our time, our people have looked after themselves with our knowledge. We need to remember that a capitalist monocultural movement is destroying our planet. Mother Earth is the one that provides us with food, medicine, and this is why we hold these celebrations to thank Mother Earth. Next, please. Our festive ritual agricultural calendar reminds us of life cycles, sowing cycles. In the global south, we have just celebrated the Chacana festival, the Southern Cross festival, that reminds us that we are cosmos creatures. We belong to the earth, the moon, the stars. Our life nurtures crops, and we should have health in our territories. We need to remember this deep ancestral knowledge that reminds us of the holy spaces in different territories. Next, please. We have living wise men and women with their prayers and their spirituality protect and look after the territory. Next, please. This song, the lyrics say that we need health, health is dignity, health is life. We need a free and united community. We need our own thoughts and heart. This is what Bolivia has to offer to the world. If you know that there is the 22nd of April, Mother Earth Day, this is possible because Bolivia has promoted this, and now the world remembers that we are part of Earth. We need to remember Earth, water, clean air. If this is not the case, no one will be healthy. Next, please. As a Quechua midwife, we're also promoting specific caregiving communities. Capitalist monocultures have taught us to survive by ourselves with as much money as you can make, just on your own you will survive, and that's a lie. And that has been shown during the pandemic. Collective and community care is essential, and this has helped our communities survive. And this is what we need in order to humanize health, and it's what we need to confirm that we are interconnected, that if we look after Mother Earth, we're looking after our own health and the health of future generations. Next, please. Proposals. South-South cooperation. We need to address this topic because when it comes to climate justice, 99% of the world have 99% of the world actually supports the 1%. So we cannot say, it's not fair to say that the global south is contaminating the world. It's actually the global north. So we need to promote sovereign health research and also innovation research in order to have health sovereignty. We need to articulate and complement various types of medicine in order to look after life. Capitalist medicine focuses on profit and not on looking after communities. If there is no clean water, there is no health. We need to implement acceptance processes, and we need to accept ancestral practices and knowledges. If you go through statistics, and if you're really committed to protecting life, please check this. 2/3 of humankind still apply our ancestral knowledge, and indigenous peoples are actually looking after our water sources, because huge capitals have concrete graveyards, and people have died because they didn't have healing plans. We need to have effective health plans throughout the territory. People need to organize themselves to defend their rights, and this is how we can support everyone's right to health. Next, please.
Soy parte de la red de comunicación
I
indígena.
am part of the Indigenous Communication Network. We have translated the COVID messages, and we share our knowledge, our identity. We disseminate what is happening throughout the world. And this is thanks to the indigenous community knowledge we have created and shared. And it's very important to disseminate this information. This shouldn't be just one more course for you to get a diploma. We need to talk about happiness, joy, etc. I am also part of the high-level Alma-Ata Commission, and as a high-level commissioner, we have worked on a document called Universal Health in the 21st Century, 40 Years of Alma-Ata. We presented this document, and as part of this high-level commission, we have discussed this topic so that health and intercultural aspects are part of the process as well. The Alma-Ata Declaration actually talks about social justice, medicinal plants, and other things as well. We need to articulate a work with the ministries of agriculture, water, culture, education. We need this coordination within each territory. Next, please. We have worked based on international documents. We have worked with PAHO documents. Also, the Indigenous Youth Reform Plan, and we have also worked with FILAC. I am also part of the COVID-19 Indigenous Platform, and we have submitted major documents in 2020. The community actions, ancestral medicine-related community actions have also been very important. There you have the website. Next, please. Well, looking after Earth. Of course, you have heard Dr. Walter. His presentation was excellent. We shouldn't be thinking about 10 years time, 20 years time. It is now that Earth is being impacted by our extractivist model, and that wealth goes to 1% of humankind, and it's not redistributed. We need to focus on the life of our indigenous peoples. We are the change that we want to see, as Gandhi said. It's a time for different peoples to start working again. The future generations need and deserve safe, secure food and water. We need to ensure diverse thoughts and knowledges, because all of this protects biodiversity. Next, please. The Zoom poll, please. Do you think it's possible to have an intercultural debate in order to find a solution to the world climate crisis? Yes? No?
Muchas gracias por esta respuesta, porque eso quiere decir que hay predisposición.
Thank you, because this means that you are willing to work on this, and this is what our world needs. We need to respect cultural diversity when it comes to protecting biodiversity. Next, please. We should remember that health is a human right and it's not a good. I am part of the People's Health Movement. We have worked throughout the world for 5 years. They started in Bangladesh a few years ago. In 2012, in South Africa, I was selected to coordinate Latin American work until 2017. We are part of various territorial networks. We help protect the right to health. I'm also part of Brazil's University Network, and I'm also part of the Latin American Social Medicine Association. You can find references online. Next, please. I'm also part of the Health Virtual Library, where we have traditional complementary medicines. There you have the website, because if we have comprehensive medicine, we can look after territories, spaces, and we can respect everyone's spirituality. And within that interconnected, affectionate work, then life is possible. Next, please. I know I had a very limited time, and this is why I have just shared these slides. But there is so much more work to do, and we need to keep transforming the system. Many times laws are pretty on paper, but what happens in reality? When we think about really protecting life, we need to work together. It's not just about, accusing people. Even wealthy people, part of the 1%, if you're not traveling to Mars this weekend, you are not part of that 1%. So everyone else who drinks water, we need to reflect. We need to bring together our wills, also our social, political, and technical capacities in order to find a solution to climate change now. And from this love for life is that we need to do this. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Camacho. It has been a privilege to have both of you as speakers today. So many positive comments, and I'm sure people want to know a lot more. We do have some time for questions. First of all, Walter, there's a question about the concept of the climate diet, which would have a reduced intake of animal protein. How could we prepare ourselves for this kind of diet or perspective? Well, first of all, I think we need to distinguish some things here. When you talk about animal protein diets or maybe that raising animals causes emissions, it's a bit of a generalization. And we need to avoid this to prevent misinformation. There are some food production systems that are sustainable and others are not. Hopefully in the near future, not food production systems that are not sustainable should be eliminated. There are very interesting projects led by younger generations that focus on other things. They focus on where the food is produced, if there are social issues in that problem, if there is social exploitation, if there are environmental impacts. What I think is essential is that we shouldn't generalize, because that argument becomes weaker. So there are situations in which some animal production systems, they are the most challenged ones. Some are sustainable, yes, okay, but in other situations, animal protein is produced in natural ecosystems that are preserved, that have had large herbivores for 8 million years. Well, that's fine. We need to make sure that those ecosystems remain sustainable, but other ecosystems are not sustainable. If a system does not consider animal welfare, environmental impact, social inequalities, those systems are not sustainable. But let's be careful. We shouldn't really generalize, because that's not accurate. Thank you. Dr. Camacho, how can we compile this well-being philosophy with the Bolivian health policy? That's a great question, because it's something that we are now building. We are building a plurinational state that respects indigenous and peasant communities. In 2019, we had a racist coup, so it's not easy to do this. I've been attacked because I'm part of a community radio. Racism is part of something that we need to heal. Otherwise, we're not really addressing the cause of climate change. Therefore, from this collective construction of what living well is, some very good things have been done. Hopefully these reports will be available to you as well. And that is a new horizon we aspire to, because indigenous peoples don't look after nature just for them. They do it for the whole world. Everyone who was born here, if you drink water, it's because our Mother Earth provides us with food, medicine, water. So we're all brothers and sisters, regardless of the color of our skin, regardless of our language. We were born in this world and we have the right to exist with dignity. And this buen vivir, or living well, has to do with acknowledging these ancestral knowledges. For instance, the hormonal circles, the circadian cycles. These are directly impacted by sunlight, moonlight. If you work at a hospital, you know that during full moons, we have more births, because water is affected by the moon phases, just like our hormones. There are major studies on how sunlight and moonlight affects us. And this reminds us that we are a creature of the cosmos. We have that wisdom. So this buen vivir, or living well, is important in Bolivia, but Chile is also working in this regard. And we need to remember that we cannot survive on our own. We can survive together. We need to remember that if humankind wants to prosper and survive, we need to support, listen to each other, and learn from diversity in order to look after biodiversity. Thank you very much. I think Okay, thank you very much. If it is a work in progress, I do understand that we're going to provide a specific example yet. Walter, a question about the mega drought affecting the Parana Basin and other areas since 2019. Which are the lessons learned from this extreme unprecedented climate event in the region regarding food safety? That's a good example of what we were addressing, which are the impacts caused by climate change. I think we have wasted too much time and too many resources in working with 2080 scenarios. Every year we have new evidence about the impact of global warming on extreme event variability today. So this mega drought, for instance, in Australia a few years ago, there was a similar drought in the south of the United States, the Southwest, or other droughts. They show us that these events we should learn to adapt to.
These events cause real trouble in food production, food security. This is not just about climate change. We have a vulnerable population, and then we add factors to this population, well, they are going to be the most severely affected. So it's not exception with climate change. Whenever there is an extreme event that will affect food production, who will suffer the most? The most vulnerable populations, whether because they do not produce food for their own consumption or because if there is more scarcity, the price goes up and they do not have the resources to purchase it. What's happening in Argentina, what happened in Australia and the southeast of the United States are all events from which we need to learn. We need to learn. We work with that approach that I showed, the 4-pillar approach. You can use whatever approach fits better to your reality, but we should look at climate change now. We should stop thinking about climate change and the problem of future generations. The climate change is here today, and we do have evidence of that frequency and damage of extreme events, and it is increasing. So we should work on that. We should work on climate change today. Thank you. I have one question for Ms. Camacho. How does science, or what kind of science can contribute to the intercultural health process, and is this possible considering current interinstitutional structure? That is a very complex question that really has to do with the reality in the countries. In Bolivia, we are mostly farmers. Before the coup, we worked with the Ministry of Science and Technology and academics to promote dialogue, interscientific dialogue for modern Western science. Unfortunately, this is very closely connected to corporate capitalist interests, people that we do not know, but they take our land, they take our water sources, and they're predators, and they are really damaging many communities and territories. But there are also scientists, like the scientists that we have been in touch with during this course, that are very much devoted to caring after humankind. So science that is based in all of us and our love for life is what we need to continue working with ancestral knowledge that is still alive. Look at those mega constructions in Cusco, for example. There are water channels and water engineering that dates back to thousands of years that even yet nowadays has not been replicated. We need to remember that we come from very wise peoples that are still preserving part of this knowledge, even though they have been victims of genocide. So we need to be willing to sit with one another to understand other ways of life and open mind, open hearts to learn from other knowledge. Our brothers and sisters in the global south and most of the indigenous populations are the ones that are suffering the most the the devastating impacts of climate change now. And so I fully agree with Dr. Walter. We should think about what we're going to do now. And this course is another tool. I hope that we are able to talk about what we are doing now, today, in our land, in our territory. It is not just about earning more money, and it doesn't matter if you earn more money. If you do not have fresh water, clean water, what are you going to work for? To pay for a kidney transplant? That doesn't make sense. Thank you very much for such touching answer. I have one question for Walter. Can we have enough production to for the expected growth in the population without using
Ojalá
pesticides?
que sí.
I hope so.
Siendo realista, me parece que lo que tenemos que
Realistically
pensar
speaking, I think that what we should think
de
about
vuelta, que
is,
cómo,
well,
cómo
again,
diseñar sistemas
how
de
to
producción que sean
design
sostenibles.
production
Si el
systems that
sistema
are
de producción
sustainable.
incluye
If
una
the
dependencia
production
alta
system means that
de
we are highly
agroquímicos,
dependent on
probablemente no sea sostenible.
agrochemicals, well,
Incluso
that means
aunque
it is
sean
not
agroquímicos que se
sustainable.
descompongan
Even
en
if
el
we are
terreno,
going to,
no
even if
afectando
we are
demasiado el
speaking
medio ambiente.
about
Es mucho más razonable
agrochemicals that
plantearse,
are more environmentally friendly,
y
so to
acá
speak.
yo,
But
digamos, coincido con cosas que decía Vivian,
I agree with Vivian.
es mucho más razonable
It is more
plantearse sistemas de
reasonable to
producción que
think
sabemos que
about
funcionan,
production
que
systems
respetan
that
el medio
we know that
ambiente.
work,
En el caso
that we know
de
are proven and
enfermedades, en el caso de
environmentally
pestes,
friendly.
hay
In the case of
enemigos
pests or
naturales,
diseases,
hay
there are
mecanismos de
natural
diseñar
enemies.
sistemas de
There
producción
are
que
mechanisms to
respetan la
designing
naturaleza.
production systems that
Ahora,
are respectful of
yo le digo
nature.
la verdad, si uno
Now,
piensa en el año 2050,
if
con
you
9 mil
think about
millones
the
de
year
personas,
2050
va a
with
ser
2
muy
billion
difícil, es un desafío grande.
people more, well,
Yo
that
tengo
will be a
esperanza, yo
big
creo que
challenge.
es
I am
de que eso
hopeful. I am
suceda
hopeful that
porque,
it is
porque
possible.
realmente lo que está pasando,
Because
le decía, incluso aunque pensemos en las
even if
peores
we
dimensiones, que lo único
think
que
of the
importa es
worst case
enriquecerse,
scenario,
hoy a
where
esa
people
gente
only
se le está
care about
diciendo,
getting
miren, el
richer, well,
consumidor
people
también está
today are
prestando
being
atención a
told that
cosas que antes no le
consumers are
prestaba.
also
Entonces,
paying
ya no
attention
va a
to
ser
things that they
posible
didn't
generar
pay
una cantidad de
attention to in
riqueza
the
haciendo
past.
cualquier cosa.
So it will
No va a
be
ser
harder
posible.
to amass that kind of
Yo lo sabemos
wealth
todos.
just
Yo
doing
tengo hijas
anything or whatever. I
del
have
siguiente que
daughters
no van a comprar una
who
determinada prenda
sometimes
si
do
saben
not
que esa
purchase a
empresa está
particular
mano de obra
piece of
infantil.
clothing
Hay
if they
cada vez más
know
gente que
that
dice, yo
that
no voy a
company
consumir
employs
alimentos
child
si esos
labor.
alimentos
There
están
are more and more people that,
atados
for
a la
example, not to
deforestación
choose one
tropical.
particular
Entonces,
food item
incluso siendo
if that
pesimista,
food
incluso
item
diciendo lo que mueve el mundo
was
son los
produced
intereses económicos, por suerte
making
hay
use of
mucha gente cada vez más que
deforestation.
le da importancia a
So
estos valores que hacen
thankfully,
la
there are
sociedad.
more and more people
Entonces,
who are taking
se
these
pueden generar
aspects into
sistemas de
account,
producción
which did
que
not happen
aseguren
in the
la
past.
seguridad
So I
alimentaria
think
para
that
el
we
mundo en los próximos
can
30
have
años. Yo
production
creo que sí,
systems that will
y creo que va a
ensure
ser
food
fundamental que
security for
tengamos
the next
presente
decades.
estas
And
cosas que
I
estamos
think it
hablando
is
hoy, estos
crucial for
valores
us to
que antes
consider
no
these
se los
values that we
asignábamos
were discussing
importancia.
today, values that maybe were
Muchísimas gracias.
disregarded
Una
in the
última
past.
pregunta para doctora
Great,
Camacho
thank
de
you. And
cierre y
last
en seguimiento a
question
lo que acaba de
for
decir el doctor Bedgen. Em,
Dr. Camacho.
Queda el incentivo de que los participantes de este curso tengan
So
liderazgo, hagan
do you think
iniciativas,
that, or is it possible that those who take
implementen
part in this
políticas
course
para
will
combatir el
develop
cambio climático, sobre
policies
todo
to
en el
fight
ámbito de la
climate
salud,
change,
pero
especially in
algunos de ellos estarán
healthcare?
monitoreando,
That
estarán
is a
vigilando.
possibility, but some others will
¿Qué
monitor,
recomendación tiene
will
para ellos?
control. So what would you recommend to them? Well, for those of you who are listening, to stay strong. We are alive today because our past generations have taught us and have fought. This is a difficult time. This is a difficult era. But what we want to convey to our future generations is that they are deserving. They are deserving of fresh water. They are deserving of clean water. They are deserving of forests. They are deserving. So we need to link our emotions, our respect, care, coming together, meeting. The fact that we are here today, we might not see one another once again in the future, but just the fact that you know that we are here today and what you heard today can make even a small contribution. A small contribution can make a big impact. Just because we're small, sometimes we're told that we don't have enough strength, and that's a lie. Smaller steps can make great impacts. Together, we are strong, and we are together. We cannot exist alone. Together, as a learning community, as a knowledge community, you can count on me. And thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you so much for allowing me to take part in this course. And I know that you have the chance and you have the strength to do it.
Muchísimas gracias
Thank you. Thank you both so much. It's been a great session, really. And of course, the others have been very valuable and very interesting. But I think that today we feel inspired and we feel hopeful. Please continue promoting the course. People can continue to enroll and sign up. You can get our slides, links to other materials, and to the recordings. If you are not able to join us in live, you can have access to the recordings whenever it's more suitable to you. And this is very important to build a wider community in our region. Again, thank you all so much. This is the end of our session today, and looking forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you to our panelists for the time, your knowledge, and your generosity. Thank you all.